Can everybody hear me out there? Yeah, there we go. We're going to get started. We got a little bit of a late start. That's okay, because people are out there buying books, and that's what this is all about. It's about history and books and learning. And thank you for doing that. And books will be available. If you didn't get one before the show, then you can get one after this show and panel. And if you got cell phones on, maybe put them on silence. And we're going to get started. My name is Curtis Peoples. Thank you for coming out on a Friday night. I know that there's a lot going on in Lubbock, Texas tonight. And lots of great music and plays, lots of art happening. And it's good to see a nice little crowd out there for Women in West Texas Music. People were asking me, they're like, what is this event about? Is it a performance? What is it? I said, well, there's a little bit of performing in it, but it's really about producing books and documentaries about West Texas music. And so we've got the music of Guy Clark, we'll be representing Delbert McClinton, Kenny Rhodes, and her husband Joe Gracie, Minnie in the Lubbock Livestock Documentary with Amy Maynard. We're going to be talking about all of that here a little bit. And Kathleen Hudson from Schreiner University came up. And we've had a great week with Kenny here coming and talking to classes. Kathleen came and talked to one of my classes last night. So it's been a really fun week. We're going to get going here. Basically, the format is I'm going to sit down and talk to Kenny a little bit about her Radio Dreams project. It's just come out, this book, and she's going to play a few songs for us. And then after that segment, then I'm going to bring up Tamara, Kathleen, Amy, and Diana. And then we're going to talk about those other books and their projects and where they're going with that and future plans. And so it's really a celebration of women here in Women's History Month. But I want just to open up a discussion and dialogue. We're not going to get too in-depth into everything, but hopefully it's something that we can continue for another 11 months throughout the year. Why does it just have to be 1 month? We can talk year round. So.
Yeah. Let's do it for Curtis Peoples.
All right. So, Kimmy and I met this summer. She was at the Buddy Holly Center, and she was real busy, and I was kind of being shy about it, but I went up and I tapped her on the shoulder and said, hi, my name's Curtis Peoples with the Crossroads of Music Archive. Can I call you sometime? And it was about like that, and because she was standing with Dwayne Eddy, and I guess you were really busy. And she said, sure, here's my number.
When you're standing with Dwayne Eddy, you're really busy.
And so we struck up a relationship and about West Texas music and started with a phone interview and started playing her on my radio show, which is Music Crossroads of Texas. You can find these little flyers out there. It's all West Texas music. And this whole month has been nothing but women in West Texas music and playing all kinds of artists that lots you've never heard of, a lot that I'd never even heard of. But people have been sending me files and old records and things like that and names. So that's kind of how it all got started, and we've been working together all week. But let's kind of back up a little bit and talk about Radio Dreams, because I think that's why we're here. And your project, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's hard to talk about it in a nutshell, but I'll try. When I went to Austin in 1979, my whole life changed, and I was like a fish that someone just dropped in the water. I finally found my place. I found where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be doing, and my whole life literally changed in one day when I walked through the door of a recording studio called Electric Gracieland in the basement of Coke FM. It was just after the heyday of Austin. A lot of people here are familiar with this pilgrimage that took place, and this just, what is the Country Music Hall of Fame's calling Country's Roaring 70s had been going on. And I met this man named Joe Gracie, who had been right at the heart of that, really, the voice of that movement, because he had been on the radio at Coke FM. And he was a good singer. He was just about to make a record with the man that became it was his dear friend who became my dear friend and mentor, Jack Cowboy Clement, who had produced Johnny Cash and Charlie Pride and had made all these great records. And he had this bright future ahead of him as a singer. And he was just about to do that, and he lost his voice to cancer permanently. So being the strong and wonderful spirit that he was, Joe Gracie moved to the basement because Cowboy Clement said, well, clearly you know what a hit record sounds like, just about as good as anybody, so just become a producer. So he decided to become a record producer, and I literally passed Stevie Ray Vaughan on the way out as I was going in to record my first songs. And I just had my first little handful of songs, but he had already written songs. And just a lot of amazing things happened. I formed my first band, Kimmy Rhodes and the Jackalope Brothers, with him and another icon from that period, Bobby Earl Smith. And started working with them, and as fate would have it, at the time I became the person who got to sing the songs that he could no longer sing. And my first little 45 that was pretty hard earned at that point was one of his songs and one of Bobby Earl's songs. And from there, for a couple of years, we worked together as artist and producer, and eventually things changed and we fell in love, and we spent the next 30 years together. And then, you know, during that period of time when I first met Cowboy Clement, he had a song, played a song for me called We Must Believe in Magic. And we were all pretty much basking in the magnificence of Joe Gracie's newfound passion for life, having lived and survived the cancer that almost took his life. And that song, We Must Believe in Magic, really sort of became the theme song for the next 3 decades plus. And after a while, you know, after that fun ride, one day we found out that Joe Gracie's cancer had returned. And then that started another journey through cancer, and it was a fascinating world. It was another struggle, and eventually, after a long and a hard and a brave fight, we lost him. And I realized that for 3 decades I had never thrown anything away. There are just the smallest thing when you're making music is so special to you, because it's a wonderful world, and it's full of really incredible people, and we just both felt so privileged to be in that world that we just kept everything. And even things we didn't mean to keep, like old itineraries from tours and things. So when the dust settled on all that, I started going through things. It took me quite a few years, and I found a book that he had started called Radio Dreams. And I thought, well, I had always been after him to finish that book. I knew he'd started it. He'd shown me little bits and pieces through the years, and I thought it would be a healing thing, and it would be a great way to place some of those archives. I also had many, 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 many rare recordings that he had recorded all during the 70s on a TEAC 4-track reel-to-reel machine, and I just, you know, had a responsibility that it was either do it or don't do it. And I decided to do it, and it became much more than finishing a book. I decided to make it a dual memoir, and we called it a duet memoir in the end. But I embarked on that journey, and we started going through things and finding amazing things. It led to, I've been working with the Country Music Hall of Fame on an exhibit that's going to open in May, and a documentary that's ballooned into 12 hours about the music that we loved and made all those years. And it's given me many wonderful places to place all these archives, and most importantly, to place my husband's legacy, because I wanted him to be remembered for his contribution to, and actually he changed the music. So that was what I was doing, but I like to think of the book as a brochure, really, because the project, I became more and more aware as time went on how great it would be if everybody else that I know would do what I was doing. It took time, it cost money, we had to do crowdfunding, but you know, there were things that had silverfish crawling around in them. I won't even say some of the things that were in them. But as we started to get those things out and they just spread out all over the house, I realized, and I started talking to Curtis and the Country Music Hall of Fame and some other folks, and I realized that the shape some of these things are in when they make it to the place where they belong. So I thought that maybe, and I've got my friend Diana Finley here with me tonight, and she's been looking at the archives. Kathleen Hudson's done it, you know.
Yep, Kathleen will be up here in a little bit. We have Kathleen's collection, part of it. She's started donating stuff to us, I guess, about 8 years ago or something. And it's a wonderful collection. And
Name some of the other people.
well, you know, it all started with the Don Caldwell collection, and back in 1999 when Don Caldwell Studios closed down. But since then, we've grown to over 130 collections. We've got Kerrville Folk Festival. We've got David Box, the Hancock family, Tommy and Charlene, Jesse Taylor, just so many. There's so much great music, and it's more than just records and CDs. There's tons of pictures. Today we had Diana and Kimmy going through just hundreds of Jesse Taylor pictures
It was a
identified.
blast. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
that's
so-
Linda Ronstadt. And they're going, really? And I'm like, yes, that's Linda Ronstadt. And just all the people and obscure people. It's like, but he didn't play the trombone with David Carroll didn't play the trombone with the Hancocks. I know, but that's David Carroll. And
But I said it was Mark Anthony, so
I
we can talk
have-
to Jim later and see.
Yeah, you'll have to show him, maybe
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but it was a David Carroll lookalike to me. So it was fun to sort through all those things, and I always kept all those things thinking someday, you know, I was going to be old, and not that I'm old, but that I was going to look through all those pictures and all of those, but I never dreamed it would be in such a cool way. And things, you know, as I've taken this journey, things have started to make more sense to me, and I've got a better perspective on the things that have happened to me, and I have a lot of hope because of it. And I just, you know, it's just been a wonderful thing. And I finished Joe Gracie's book. Now, he couldn't speak. I was married to a man who couldn't speak for 30 years, so I actually had to. Now, being from Fort Worth, he would lie. And he would blow things out of proportion. So, and you know, in all of our years together, when I had the luxury as a woman, and when my husband would be drunk and talking sign language like this, I could actually edit him. So as I was doing, I would feel his spirit kind of drifting around behind me sometimes as I'd be typing. And I had to actually run a lot of it by Bobby Earl Smith and his brother Bill and Joe Nick just to see if it was a lie or the truth. You know, but mostly it was the truth because it was some pretty amazing stuff. But I like to think of it as the literary version of being able to kick your husband under the table. So that's the project and that's the book. It was a long journey. It looks so easy, doesn't it, y'all, when you hold it in your hands, but what you go through to get to this point. But the story of an outlaw DJ and a cosmic cowgirl, and also other motivation is we spent 3.5 years at MD Anderson Cancer Hospital, and he always felt like they had given him 30 years of life. So when his cancer returned, we wasted no time getting back there, and it was a fascinating world, but it was very hard in the end what we went through, and being with all those other souls at MD Anderson and seeing the hope and the struggle and the just fascinating journey and all the things about the journey through cancer, I realized that there were very few people that I knew that their life hadn't been touched by cancer in some way. And I also think that's a very important part of Joe Gracie's legacy because he showed how you can be strong and reinvent yourself. And what was it Stephen Hawking said just last week, don't focus on your handicap, focus on your passion, which is exactly what he did. And I think that my story brings hope to songwriters and people who want to be in the music business, and they can see how I just had all this wonderful dumb luck, you know, while I was trying to figure it out, and a lot of magic. And but also, I think as a caregiver, I feel like a cancer survivor. I've never had cancer, but I'm definitely a cancer survivor. And then just his ability to fight it and his ability to give up the fight were an incredible part of the story. And my journey onward after that is this project's a big part of that. So I felt like that would help people whose lives had been touched by cancer, as well as honor not just his legacy as a musician, but his legacy as a cancer survivor. So that was another real motivation for doing the book.
And so she was talking about the placing his material at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is great. And as I talked to Kimmy, then told her about what we do, and she allowed me to come to her house and load up a van full of stuff and bring it back here to Lubbock, Texas to begin archiving her stuff here. And so we're honored tonight to be saying that now we have the Kimmy Rhodes collection at the Crossroads of Music Archive here at Texas Tech University.
It was such a joy this morning. I had tears in my eyes, and Diana was watching me, and I stood up on a chair and held my phone above this table with my life. And in some extent, at least Joe Gracie's life as it applies to my life.
Yes.
Because my stuff belongs here because I'm from Lubbock. And just everything's so beautifully done. The staff, John, and just everybody there. I learned a lot about how to archive, and so it really helped me too. But it was just a great feeling. And also a lot of theater costumes and things. I worked with Joe Sears in theater, Joe Sears of Grey Tuna, and now work with Jason some. And I just had all these costumes and, plays from the very first word that was written all the way through, not just the first script, but the second script and pictures and all those things that I think will have such a wonderful educational value. And I held on to them. I mean, how do you let go of your elephant costume? But I finally did, and I think they.
We have the scripts and the music and the costumes. They're all clean and ready to go. Everything. We could go put the play on tomorrow. Well, we did need some rehearsing, but so I've been talking to maybe community theater, maybe Texas Tech, talking to students who maybe want to research the plays, could do a project, or maybe even put it on. But if we don't save it, then we don't have it to do it.
Well, and it was great because I decided to self-publish the book. I have been a person who, mentored by a guy that was the engineer at Sun Studios. We realized early on the value of releasing your own music, and I'm just a little red hen of releasing my own stuff, and it gives me a lot of freedom that I've always wanted to have, and it usually worked out. So I just lost my thought. but it's really great to see.
It's been a great week for her to come in, and because we had everything here, and a lot of times when we get a collection in, we go out and we pick it up, and you just never know what condition it's going to be in. But Kimmy had spent so much time buying acid-free containers and things like that, and really did a great job of organizing before here.
I thought I had until I got in, so I was left to do, but because of this documentary that I've been working on with a guy named Eric Kettleman, and there were just a lot of archives to place. I'm still at it. I'm just trying to find the right place and the place that'll be the most accessible. And that later the Country Music Hall of Fame came along and we decided to do this exhibit after we started the documentary. So it's kind of all finding its home, but I'm very, very honored to be part of it.
And we're very honored, and that's why I wanted to have her up here to talk about sort of this process. There's her creative process, and there's a whole back end of archiving the creative process itself. And to have her to be a part of that has been very beneficial to us, because not only can she help us identify pictures, but she's a great ambassador for us out there. She's been very telling people, oh, you've got to do this, and put things out on Facebook. So that's been
inspired now.
She's inspired, and that's a continuation of the radio dreams there. And I think she's going to play us a song. I don't know what you're going to play. Today we drove by her old house. That was interesting, but she came with the wind last Sunday. With all that wind, she just blew in with the wind, and then we've just been having fun in Lubbock, and they've been driving around today with Sherry and Diana and looking at statues and Buddy Holly stuff.
Oh, we went to Prairie Dog, and I thought we were going to lose Diana by the time we got to Joyland. Our friend Sherry was the ambassador to Lubbock. Well, I grew up here. I was born in Wichita Falls, and also I'd like to say that I'm an ambassador for the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. I've been working with young writers and things, and I recently came back here. That's what the Dwayne Eddy thing was about over there, and those are great folks over there, and all the things that everybody's doing. But I was born in Wichita Falls, and my father was an orphan during the Great Depression, and he had worked his way up from a second grade education, homeless on the streets of Wichita Falls, adopted by a carnival woman, grew up at the carnival, ended up back on the streets of Wichita Falls, worked his way up to a used car lot. It's a lot of information, but it's in the book. Worked his way up to a used car lot, and a tornado came one afternoon and blew his car lot away. And then, so what did he do? Well, I had an uncle here, I don't know, there may be people here old enough to remember the Golden Q Pool Hall on Avenue Q. Well, my uncle owned that pool hall. I can proudly say that he taught Joey Lee to play pool. And so the hustling possibilities were good here, and he was a gambler. So once we got here, I was about the age that he was when he became a gambler. And he looked at me, he hadn't a clue how to be a father, but he said, how would she survive? And he saw that I was always singing and making up songs and stuff. So he would get me to sing like gospel songs, especially like All Road Across and stuff, my earliest songs. And he would stand me out front of the car lot to sing for 10 cents a song, while he would go check bets in the back. And so he was not like any of the other dads. He could, he could find a quarter in your nose and lose it and find it in your ear, and he could do all that carny jargon. And I was always the kid that walked away from the carnival with the big bear because he knew how to win them. And so he was a really special dad. And when he passed away, one night I got a little bit too close to my guitar. I meant to go to sleep, and I needed to go to sleep. I was in Nashville on a riding trip there, and I got a little bit too close to my guitar about 2 o'clock in the morning, and as the sun was coming up, I had finished this song, which was really, I think, the song that I wrote when I was remembering just what a cool guy he was, and grieving that I had really some things. So anyway, it's called Windblown. It's too hot for the corn and the grain. Cotton's not getting much rain. And why anyone lives on the plain, there ain't nobody knows. These winters seem not to go out like a line, and then springtime comes straggling in, all in, and it's a welcome sight for sore eyes, but it's all do you think it's unkind to suppose that a desert's no home for a rose? I guess I'll always wish I could know things that you never told me. Sometimes it's so real I could swear, but I can see you standing right there, with the sand in your eyes and your hair all down. What a welcome sight you would be tonight. Oh, there's a whisper I hear on the breeze. It's like a ghost when it drifts through the trees, and it's like a song that somebody sings and nobody knows it. devil danced down the street and gathered the trash and the leaves, and like a gift it just fell at my feet. All went. What a treasure your memories, even if it's all wind.
So we've had a lot of fun this week, going to classes and talking to students about the book, about being a woman in a man's world. In Charlotte Owen's class, that was really interesting. I got to hear some stories I had not heard before. So it's been a very enlightening week for, I think, for both of us, you know, for the archive and getting to know Kenny a little bit more. And it's just been a real treat to spend. She's been staying with me, and Diana's been at the house too, so for the last couple of days. And it's just, we've been working a lot, really. It's been from wake up in the morning and then late at night, so it's just been a great week. And
I think I got a little bit more sleep than you did.
yeah. But, it's been good. So, I'm just trying to think where we're going to go from here. It's just we've done so
We
much.
probably ought to get the others up here.
Yeah, so what we're
pretty
gonna
soon,
do-
and I could do one more song, and then we could get, or we could get them up here and I can.
Or we can make some radio trains.
Yeah, let's
We have a
do it.
lot to talk about, so if you
Because
give us
I'm
just a
feeling
second.
kind of lonely up here, and I'm looking at all these wonderful, strong, beautiful women and all.
And I do want to say a big thanks to John Holmes, who's been helping us all week,
Oh.
and Cynthia, our other.
Scarecrow, I'll miss you most of all.
She's nicknamed him Scarecrow. I think that's
Or
funny.
Dumbledore, whatever.
So we've had a great week, and Amy DeVoge, is Amy out there? She's back there, and she's been helping
Yeah,
me
where
with
are you,
sound.
Amy? Oh, I'm just getting started on Amy.
And, yeah, so we've got some special things we're gonna do. So she brought me some West Texas Heaven master tapes, and we're gonna transfer those and start playing around with those a little bit in the
Re-release it on
studio.
vinyl.
So Amy is our chief recording engineer at the Crossroads Recording Studio at the library, if you don't know. We have a studio there, she's in charge of that. She's a phenomenal musician and engineer. She's been helping out with us with the microphones and everything tonight. It's always good to have an audio professional help us out. But there's going to be a lot of great work to be done in the studio with Kimmy's music and with Amy, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some re-release, because when you get those master tapes out and you start archiving, you start finding extra stuff on tracks and extra, wow, I didn't know I said that, or, you know, sometimes there could be little outtakes and things like that. So it's
I
going to
found
be,
letters I didn't even know I had, too, this week. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what the outtakes were, because we were so dug in on those tapes to what we were doing and choosing which one and all that. And it's been since 1990, John. It's been since, I think, about 1992 when I actually really started it. So I'm wondering what we did and said in 1992, and it'll all be on the tape.
so there's still lots of great things to come. Also want to thank Dean Bella Gerlich of the Texas State Libraries and our Director of Southwest Collection, Jennifer Spurrier, for all of their support, for helping us put this on, and we want to thank you too for coming out tonight, because I know there's a lot to do. Give us just a second, and we're going to get everybody else up here and talk about all these wonderful women, and these are excellent projects. And so if you don't have any of this material after the fact, be sure to get out and get it. So give us just a second, and we'll get everybody else up. Thanks. All right, we're going to get started here again so we can have some time. And basically what's going to happen, they're going to, each one's going to tell you about the projects and current projects that they're working on, things associated with this West Texas theme that I brought in, but it's a little bit more than that too. And then maybe some talking back and forth. We're finding out all these connections between everybody here. It's amazing. It's that whole Crossroads thing. But I want at least time for people in the audience to be able to ask questions. So I'll run down into the audience with the microphones, and if you guys got questions, all you have to do is raise your hand, And let's go and get started. I want to start over here with Kathleen Hudson from Schreiner University, who I've known for a long time now. And I call you a mentor. I love your teaching style. I was watching her last night in class. I was like, I need to be more like Kathleen. And she is just a phenomenal educator. She's a great music historian. And I'm just honored to have you here and to come talk to my class and to be on the stage and talk a little bit about women in West Texas music, especially that you have right there.
This book.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Wow. I am so honored to be here. And I had a ball in his class, needless to say. And I even was reminded that my primary central joy comes from sharing. And I don't necessarily see myself as a scholar or as a lot of the other labels that sometimes show up. What brings me the most joy is to share. And I produce a coffee house at our university. And I realize that when I'm introducing the students, how much joy I have. So I had the opportunity once again to experience that. And those of us, all of us up here that wear a lot of hats and have a lot of different creative projects that as we get at a certain place in life and you're sort of looking back, you go, oh, there was a pattern there. There was a weaving there. And for me, the weaving was definitely a central mission for me, and that's that stories and songs make a difference in the world. And I just looked up one day and loved the music I was hearing at the Kerrville Folk Festival. I was there as a fan, and I had a little tape recorder and cassette tapes, and I wanted to talk to those people. And I talked and I talked and I talked, and finally somebody said, are you going to do a book? And I was, well, no, I hadn't thought about it. You're an English teacher. You need to do a book. So my first book, with Texas Songwriters, came out in 2001, and it was out of that urge to talk to people. And I don't know, David, you may even remember me running around, because we talked briefly. And what happened with the book is the people who kept showing up around me and spent more time talking to them, and it evolved that way. And then all of a sudden, when the book came out in 2001, it was labeled an oral history, and I realized that I was operating in an academic setting that actually had a name. You know, all of us, we have these little people inside us who see the world one way, and we really don't see it the way the people outside see us. And so these kinds of events, last night sitting with these women, I went home and I heard them say a couple of things to me. And one of my responses in my own head was, well, yeah, that's just because I'm older. I've been doing this a long time. But then I also realized that the little voice in my head that actually said at one time, I'm just so honored that Curtis invited me. I know what these women are doing, and I can't believe I'm sitting up here with them. And then one of my friends at home kicked me and said, wait a minute, pay attention to what you're doing. So the fun thing for me to discover, and you can tell I'm pretty excited about it, I talked to Guy Clark so long ago, and we had such a long friendship. And I knew Delbert. My goodness, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, 1963, TCU. First time I was not at my parents' house, guess where I went? The Skyliner. I mean, I didn't drink. It wasn't about partying. It was about, wow, I can find the music. And I'd already discovered folk music with my ukulele at Camp El Tesoro. So there you go. And I was off and running, the Skyliner. And then I'm reading bits and pieces in Diana's book, and there's all these Fort Worth tales, and then I got friends with Ray Sharp, and all these threads of connections. And Joe Ely, I interviewed him when we were in Cannes, France at Midem, and he was held up at the border, and he was really, really late. And I teach a lot of these different writers, but the point is, I just started looking at each one, and of course, Kimmy is a chapter in my first book.
And you knew Joe Gracie, right?
And what?
Joe Gracie was grew up in Fort Worth.
Yes, Fort Worth,
Did you
yes.
know him there?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Did not know him then. But, Luann Barton and, well, my Fort Worth connection started bubbling. So I've had a day, the first day I've had of not doing anything, and I was reading the books again and reading bits and pieces in them and just being very nostalgic. So to end up my quick part of the story here, after a couple of marriages, a PhD, trained horses, barrel racing the Fort Worth Rodeo, in 1984, I loaded up my kids and we moved to Kerrville. And it was the home of the Kerrville Folk Festival I've been attending since 1973, I believe, or 74. So every year but one. So I ended up in Kerrville, and I was going to work with Rod Kennedy's nonprofit, and that didn't work out as a way to financially support my family. But a little opening came at Shriner University for a PhD in English. I slipped right in 1985, and it's been a perfect marriage. In 1987, I looked up and realized that I was doing radio. I was running around doing radio shows with Kinky Friedman and using a razor blade, and I was just having such a good time that I felt really fragmented. I did a newspaper column, I did radio, I was producing a tribute to Jimmy Rogers because nobody else wanted to. So Budweiser gave me $1,500 and I did it. And so I just felt fragmented. So I created a little home for myself, and it's called Create Your Own Nonprofit. And so I did that in 1987, and we've celebrated 30 years, and this is a Bill Worrell original that he donated the design to celebrate 30 years at our nonprofit. And really, really pleased with that, and I have told that nonprofit goodbye, and all of my projects live at Shriner, and my archives live here, and I'm really thrilled with that. So that's been my journey, and I know Curtis wanted me to mention what I'm working on now, and it's a third oral history, third and last. I'll tell you that later, but third and last oral history. Again, I'm collecting stories. I mean, I love Flaco Jimenez. I love Santiago on Sunday morning, where we met. I got to hear her sing Volver, Volver.
We re-met, because we met a lot.
Oh, we met up. Yeah, we met up. Oh, yeah, we met. But anyway, I realized that I have a place in San Miguel de Allende. I love Mexico. And all of a sudden, out came a digital tape recorder, and then it became much more confusing, and now it's on computers and editing, and it's much harder, but I have a wonderful collection of interviews, and I'm looking to expand them. In fact, Charlotte gave me a name tonight of a woman in Lubbock who has a mariachi band, and I need to expand, beyond San Antonio and South Texas, so you guys know anybody I need to talk to. But that's my project now, and all I need to do is sit down and focus, and it will be finished. Lots of the research is done. So I'm excited about that. Tex-Mex Voices.
Yeah, so I'm going to be out in the field collecting field recordings of forgotten Hispanic music, disappearing folk music, so we're going to be doing some work together. And Women in Texas Music is a great book that she did, and the reason that, if I recall right, you got looking at the first book and you're like, oh, this is mostly men.
Exactly. We've heard that story many times. And they just showed up around me, Towns Van Zandt guy. I got my first tattoo with Johnny Winter. I mean, yes, I was 50 years old and sober, all right? But it was just a really great interview, and he said, let's go to the Paul's Tattoo Parlor in Austin. And I said, okay, so I have to figure this up here. And yeah, you don't just get one tattoo. We'll talk about that. But yeah, and I looked up, and Guy Clark, Towns, Stevie Ray, and there were women. I mean, I met Holly Dunn and Tanya Tucker and Kitty.
Yeah.
But I decided, and UT was very open to it, UT Press, and I said, I want to focus on the women. So, Terry Hendricks and Carolyn Wonderland, and there's a little more intention here with the women that I loved. And that's really all I can say. I don't ever say this is the best of, these are the women that matter. These are the women that showed up around me and that returned phone calls. In the first book, it was whoever returned a phone call, so that was really great.
I'm glad I returned the phone call.
Well, we were in the same places sometimes, yeah.
So another person that I've had in my class before is Amy Maynard. She came and talked to my class a couple semesters ago, History of West Texas Music, to talk about this wonderful documentary that she put together. It's been 10 years now, maybe a little more than that, the Lubbock Lights documentary. No, it's not about UFOs, but I guess they talk about maybe some musicians think UFOs maybe have something to do with it. But she put together this great documentary. She's come talk to my class, and she goes, and I'd like to make this announcement. She goes, I think I want to start the Amy Maker collection at the Crossroads Music Archive, so she's brought me a box of stuff to start that. I'm very honored and thrilled and excited. And Kathleen showed up with another box tonight too, so the archives are growing. So Amy, tell us a little bit about the project and what's happening with it now.
So, yeah, I knew I was making this film before I knew I was even gonna be a filmmaker, which is, and it started, I had gone to see Chili Dale Gilmore, at the backyard, but it's no longer the backyard, but it's just this perfect spring night under those big oak trees, and it was a sold-out show, and it's a pretty big venue. And the following week, and it was just a great night, and the following week was Easter, so I was coming home, because I'm from Lubbock, and he was also playing downtown. I don't know the bars anymore, but he was playing somewhere on Buddy Holly Avenue, and there were maybe 10 people in there, and 5 of them were his family. And I was mortified. I mean, I'd go walk out on the street and go, get in here. Do you know who's in it? And it reminded me of, a prophet is never appreciated in their own hometown or by their own people. And then I started thinking about, how terrible everyone was to Buddy Holly back in the day. They just said I'm not going to say it's very politically incorrect, but black music, how about that? And no one cared until he died, which was kind of a shame. And it's so interesting how he put all of his sounds together and what he did to create in this dusty, dust bowl, nothing to do town. So I knew right then, at that moment, when there were 10 people in the Lubbock show, that I was going to make a film and make sure that this town put music on the map first. I mean, I love tech, and I got my MFA from Texas Tech. I went to undergrad at University of Texas and got my MFA here. But there's other things other than football and the Red Raiders. It's all these amazing singers and songwriters and painters and, artists that have come out of here. And it just always seemed to be there was a fight with Maria Elena or not enough money in the budget to honor that and to cultivate that. So, of course, by the time I started making the documentary was the Flatland, and I started it before this, but the Flatlanders had been asked to do a song for the Horse Whisperer. And they did a song, and then they did another one, and they had so much fun writing together. I mean, they always played together here and there, and then one of them would be in, Germany, and another one would be coming through, and so they would, make dates and whatnot, but they decided to make an album, and so I just happened to be shooting the documentary then. So they didn't need me to help them get on the map, that's for sure. They were, it was a very fun ride. We did David Letterman, went to Europe with them, and really, that's pretty much why they became the centerpiece of a film, just because that was what was happening at the moment.
So who else is in the film? So I know there's great interviews with Joe and Butch and Jimmy and everything, and who are some of the other musicians that are featured in the film?
So Terry Allen is in, and all these guys could have documentaries just about them. Terry's fascinating with he's a sculptor, but he's I love his songwriting. He's just Terry. It's,
We were talking to Delbert the other day, and Delbert was talking about how Terry Allen was just like the best songwriter that he knows.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
It's just real and raw and quirky, like Lubbock is.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of the edit process. So I had 300 hours of footage by the time I was going to the cutting room. And unfortunately, in this film, the women got knocked out. And so I always wanted to do the women of Lubbock Lights, the Lubbock Light women. I mean, you know, Kimmy should be in it. Angela Straley, it was just she wasn't in Austin anymore, and it was just a time and budget thing to get her in. And the only interview that I did not conduct, was Joe Carroll Pierce. And we were just in the heat, and I was trying to, produce and get buildings, and, we were just in the midst of it. And she had just gotten off the road coming in for a panel at Texas Tech. And she was kind of tired, but I swear the interview wasn't good because I wasn't doing it. And so I had my partner George, conduct the interview, and it was the only interview that was just not that great, and it didn't flatter her, and so that sort of it just started weeding. I don't know. The men won on this one, but they wrote in the Chronicles that this really should be a 4-part decalogue.
I think what's important about it is that you recognize that this needed to be done. Here, you go to this Jimmy Dale concert, and so from a woman's perspective, as a woman producer, you were able to, and being in the film industry, pull this all together, which I think is great. I applaud you for that. And I remember because David Halley and Joe Carroll had just come back to Texas Tech. We did 30 minutes in the room. I remember we did that. We went to all those different houses, and I think that's
Yeah.
when Joe Carroll was just coming back. We played at different architecture sites and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. And Joe's an amazing archive.
Oh, yes, he is.
And I knew Joe the best. I guess the 6 kids. My 2 oldest sisters are here who were in high school when I was born, so they were so embarrassed.
I was in junior high.
They were so embarrassed my mom was walking around pregnant, and then they stole me once I was born, which was a good thing. And I think it was also by osmosis. I mean, we had the big 1970s, what are those stereos called? Components?
The consoles.
Yeah, the console. And I remember the cover of Joey Lee's first, record, and my grandmother could sing by ear, or could play piano by ear, and so I would have to sing, I keep my fingernails long so they could when I play the piano. And so I would sing, and she would play it. She had these long red fingernails. So, yeah, it was by osmosis. I was going to have to do something with music and them. But I called Joe and said, well, I'm making this little movie, and, it's kind of about love and music. And he goes, well, someone's already tried that before. And I go, oh, really? And he goes, yeah. I go, what happened to it? And he goes, well, I don't know, someone, it's a woman, blah, blah. And I go, well, now where is she from? And he goes, oh, she's from New York City. And I go, well, no wonder. No wonder it didn't get done. And I actually was going to hire another director and just produce it. And my director of photography said, no, you're not. You're doing it. It's your story. You've lived it. You know it. My Master of Fine Arts is in directing and acting, but it's from the theater. Although I worked in film for 25, 26 years, all my career, except when I was in school. But I just was so worried about the technical part, because that's the difference of film and theater. I mean, so it was very
It's a
technical.
great movie, and I know it's getting ready to be going to redistribution again.
It is going, yeah, we are making some deals right now, seeing who's gonna pay for those 34 songs that are in it.
But we still have some of it. Well, we're gonna move on around a little bit, and so there's a lot of musicians from here, grew up here, played here, but there's also musicians that were born here, but then sometimes move off and maybe in the more formative years, learn somewhere else. And that's sort of what happened with Delbert and Guy here. We're gonna talk about. Diana's written this great book. I've got about halfway through it. I found the last copy the other day at Barnes & Noble here in town. I was like, oh, I gotta start reading this book. It's fascinating. And then I got to do an interview with her and Delbert on the telephone the other day for our radio show. So we're gonna be producing some radio shows coming up. Full hour on Kenny Rhodes. We're gonna do a full hour on Delbert and a full hour on Guy. But let's talk about Delbert a little bit and this wonderful book, One of the Fortunate Few.
I'll hold it while we
Yeah.
talk about it.
Would you like me to hold it for
Would
you?
you hold it? Would you be Dana White?
It's the least I can do.
I am so, first let me tell you, this is my first stay in Lubbock, and I love it. You guys have the best kept secret in West Texas, but it has been the most wonderful trip, the most hospitable people I've ever met, and I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you.
I guess I'll start by just telling you a little bit about how the book came to be. Wendy, Delbert's wife and manager, contacted me to write a refreshed biography of him for their website for a new album project they were doing. And I said, sure, I'll be happy to. And the first thing a journalist does is look for the book or substantial copy that's been written about him. And no one had written a book. So I pulled together and interviewed him and did some things, and they liked it. So that was step one. And I said, why isn't there a book? And Delbert said, who would want to read a book about me? And I said, I would. I looked for one. I'd have bought it. And so we talked about it a little more, and he said, well, you're so enthusiastic. Maybe we ought to do this. So the race was on. And the first thing I did was kind of nail down the corners by working on a short project that was an extended article for the Journal for Texas Music History at Texas State University. And as soon as that came out, Tom Lemons, who is everybody's favorite, he had just gotten through with the heavy lifting on Tamara's book about Guy Clark. He had done another friend's book on Townes Van Zandt, and he contacted me and said, have you thought about a book? And I said, yeah, I've thought about a book. I talked to him. I talked to my dear friend and mentor, Jonik Petoskey, who said, wait, before you really write this, let me give you a few rules. Because Jonik has written the Selena biography. He has written the Caught in the Crossfire, Stevie Ray biography. He just finished the epic life of Willie Nelson. And he said, here's lessons learned. Don't write an authorized biography. Do not let it be authorized or as told to. That won't work, because there are things you're going to want to put in the book that they're going to question. And I said, okay, what else? And he said, don't write an authorized biography. And I said, okay, I'm guessing what the third one's going to be here, but yeah, we've got this. And he and Jan Reed were incredible mentors for me through this whole project. Jan kind of started this generation of music journalism with his Improbable Rise of Redneck Rock that came out after a Texas Monthly article. And so they both were really excited about this because they had seen a gap in the Delbert book. So I talked to Delbert. I said, it won't be authorized, but I'd kind of like to have your blessing and let me dig through everything. And he said, absolutely. And Wendy was grateful that she got to ship boxes and boxes of things to my house because Delbert was a hoarder. You know, I've got to say, Kimmy might be more of one, having seen everything that she's got up here.
I had Joe Gracie too.
You did.
He was the biggest hoarder on earth.
Well, I found the most amazing things, and every time I opened a box, there would be another story. And sometimes it would be the wonderful microphone that Delbert had on layaway in Fort Worth and he had been paying $2 a week on, and they were going to be backing Jimmy Reed, the great Jimmy Reed, at Jack's place this night. And so he said, I'm going to go gather all the money I can. He got the next $4.60. He got that great microphone, one of those old Shure mics that's like David Letterman had on his stage, and got it. He was so proud, set it up. The first set was fabulous. Nobody ever sounded better than Jimmy Reed in that microphone. And then they took a break, and Jimmy drank a lot of gin. And he came back after that set, and Delbert said he was playing harmonica, and he looked over just as Jimmy was getting ready to sing the vocals, and he said, "Gin projectiled all over his brand new, just out of layaway microphone." Delbert still has that mic in a glass case at his house. He said, I spent a long time with a dry toothbrush trying to clean it, but I just gave up and decided it'll be worth something someday. And it certainly was. So there were some things like that, lots of bashed up cowbells, because he wore out more drummers than anybody. And if you've ever listened to his music, you can understand why, because the beat has to be there. And so he's 77 years old. He's still traveling almost 200 days a year. He's playing everywhere, touring, and the most fun thing he has is the Delbert McClinton Cruise that is in January of every year. And it's a floating party. Kimmy
I'll
plays.
vouch for that. It's a
Kimmy
party on a
plays.
boat for a week.
It is. It's a week on a boat in the Caribbean. People ask us where we stop, and we say, I don't know.
We don't care.
We don't care. It's music.
Wherever is left after hurricane season. It kept changing this year.
That's right, it
People go,
did.
Where's it going? And everybody goes,
But we've got Kimmy, we've got Delbert, we've got the Mavericks. This year we had the Thunderbirds.
Law Lovett.
Law Lovett's played, Joe's played.
Yeah.
And then there's
Ray
a whole
Vincent.
songwriter component, which is amazing because you get to hear the songs behind the music. And so you get to hear Gary Nicholson do the songs that have been recorded by everybody by himself. You get to hear all these incredible Grammy Award-winning songwriters doing their own songs their own way. And as well as lots of young artists. Band of Heathens plays. Gabe Rhodes is young in my mind.
Your daughter plays.
Hallianna plays, my daughter. Dustin Welch. Lots of these young artists also play. And so it's bringing the old and the new together, and it's a huge family reunion. And so that really is kind of what the book was about. It was about bringing things together and telling the story of all the people that have come through Delbert's life. Early on, he was recording in the basement of Major Bill Smith Studios in Fort Worth, and it was the only place to record. Major Bill Smith was kind of a low-budget Colonel Tom Parker, and if you were familiar in Houston with Huey Moe, you would know they were kind of the same guys. Huey Moe and Major Bill Smith were sort of the same guys. And they talked fast, and they always had a big smash right around the corner. So he came in and said, Delbert, I need the band. I got a guy here, he's got a big smash. It's going to be a big smash. And he did a song, and then he did a B-side, which was Hey Baby. And Delbert listened to him play through it once. Bruce Chanel played through it. Delbert picked up the harmonica and just played, first take, this incredible intro to Hey Baby. And about every 3 years, it is in the soundtrack of a movie today. This was 1961. It became a #1 hit in the United States, and then early in '62, it hit #1 in Europe. And so Delbert and Bruce Chanel got to travel to England. These two Fort Worth boys getting to go all that way to England was just about more than either of them could handle. So Delbert was so excited, he got over there with his harmonicas and left them in the taxi. But thankfully, the taxi driver saved the day because he brought him back and said, I have this bag of things. It might belong to someone here. That saved the day. And go back in time and remember that Bruce Chanel and Delbert and Paul McCartney and John Lennon were all 22 years old. The Beatles opened for Bruce Chanel on this tour. And those guys got to be buddies. They would go out and play and bass in London, and then they went out on a 6-week trip. And along the way, Delbert says it's gotten very romanticized, the story of Delbert teaching John Lennon to play harmonica. he said, you can't really teach someone to play harmonica. You just kind of have to show them how you do it, and they play around with it until they get it right. And so he said that's kind of what he did. But several people came backstage to find out how you make those sounds with your mouth and a non-chromatic harmonica. So it was exciting, but he said that wasn't the story. The real story was on their off nights when John Lennon would come pick him up with a couple of his buddies. One night they went out and the Beatles all had leather jackets, sport coats. So Delbert said, I want to get me one of them. So he went out and got a leather sport coat and some Beatle boots, which weren't called that then, but he traded in his Fort Worth boots for Beatle boots. And so those kind of stories are really fun. And he said ultimately he learned more in his 22nd year than he had learned to that point, because they took him to these underground clubs, and he said, among other things, I saw my first beanbag chair. But what I saw people doing at beanbag chairs was just something you never saw in Fort Worth. But the story goes on, and as you go through his life, this became as much a story about American history as it did about Delbert, because on November 22nd, 1963, he was running an errand for his boss at the Stag Shop. Went down to Radio Shack to get the big ear that you could put on the wall and hear people in the next room for his boss. And as he was coming back, a motorcade was going by, going to the Air Force Base for that 13-minute flight to Dallas from Fort Worth. And he stood beside his car, and he waved at the president, and the president did this to him. By the time he got back to the Stag Shop, he told his boss, I just saw the president. And his boss said, the president was just shot. And so these kind of stories just come along. As we told this story, these were people who, Delbert was on the front row of so many things. I said, this is kind of like Forrest Gump. He saw some of the early space shots before the Apollo shots and the Gemini shots. He lived through so many different musical scenes, and I say that very cautiously. He survived so many different music scenes, from the integration of the black clubs in Fort Worth before anybody integrated anything else. And they did that organically because they were good musicians. He did, he did the Fort Worth scene. They played those incredible clubs. When everybody was required to move to California, he was there. He and Doug Sahm moved about the same time out to California, but he went to LA. He lived in Topanga Canyon, and his roommates at this shack they lived in Topanga Canyon, one of his roommates' girlfriend, old lady, wife person, was best friends with some of the girls who lived at the Manson Ranch. And so it was like, yeah, they weren't really into music, and so our music, so I didn't really know any of them. But time moves forward, and he moves to Austin, and everybody talks about the outlaw songwriter circuit in Austin during that time. But what a lot of people don't realize is at that time, blues was becoming a huge thing for college students. All of a sudden it went from way out on the east side to downtown, and Angela Straley and Delbert and all these people were playing good blues in town and bringing a little country into it as well. So they would draw people in and play everything and get them going. You move forward, after that kind of fell apart, he moved back to Fort Worth. He was living with his second wife at the time, and she wanted to go back to Fort Worth. She was best friends with a young woman named Priscilla Davis, and they lived at the Davis Mansion until 2 weeks before the murder, when they closed on their house. So all these things that happened were, the T. Cullen Davis trial is still the most infamous and most expensive murder trial that's never been solved in Texas. So these kind of stories follow Delbert's life. He was in New York during the Lone Star Cafe days. He played lots of folk music when that was a thing to do. And ultimately, he has stayed relevant through 60 years on stage. And he had a new album out last January in the blues charts. It was number 2 behind the Rolling Stones. Don Was, of course, produced the Stones album this year. And when I interviewed Don for the book, he said, you know, he had produced several records on Delbert, and of course the one on Delbert and Bonnie. And he said, yeah, when Keith called and said they wanted some examples of what I was doing way back then when I had my first shot with them, I sent them a Bonnie record and 3 Delbert records and said, this is it. And they said, that's what we want to sound like. So I think Delbert quickly says, no. But Don says that's true. So I think Delbert's greatest critic is himself. I talked to people he had hired, people he had fired multiple times, who all said, oh yeah, if he called, I'd play again with him in a minute. It was the greatest time in the world. There were a few people who said, you know, I wouldn't take $1 million for those days, but thank goodness we survived them. But at any rate, I was just so honored to be able to write the Delbert book. They became close friends. We have followed through with lots of great touring, and the media's been very good to us about the book. It's with Texas A&M Press, as is Tamara's, and it's going into its 2nd printing. So there were a few mistakes we got to fix. One guy came up during Q&A, I'm going to watch this crowd. A guy stood up during Q&A at one of the events we did, and he'd been raising his hand, and so finally I said, you in the Dale Earnhardt cap. And he said, on page 95, I found a mistake. And I said, well, I have a Sharpie. When we're done, if you'll bring it down here, I'll fix it. And so we have now fixed it for the next edition, but there are a few copies left of the first edition that do still have the mistake on page 95.
We'll be looking for it.
We'll go looking for that.
I'm sure you will. My mother did when I told her that story. She said, now what? I'm on page 95. What was the mistake?
Thank you, Diane. It's a wonderful book. All right. I have the privilege of interviewing Tamara today about a guy's book for the radio program we're putting together a show. It's just a fascinating story. But we worked together for a little bit, guys. You've been working on this documentary and been looking for photographs. So she contacted me months ago. We've been scouring the archives and stuff, looking to see if we could help her out. But that's sort of how my first introduction to Tamara was. I knew she was working on a Guy Fawkes documentary as a sort of companion to this wonderful book. So tell us a little bit about this book. Like, it's a fascinating story.
Well, I met Guy in 1998. I was a managing editor at Country Music Magazine, so I met Guy in the course of doing business there. And we became friendly. And then Leroy Parnell, another wonderful Texas guy, took me to Guy's house on April 1st, 2000. It was a Saturday. And I spent 9 hours with Guy and Leroy and Susanna, and they were all drinking and smoking, and I wasn't. But Guy and I really hit it off. We just, you know, kind of got each other, and I really like curmudgeonly men, and he was one. So one thing led to another, and I started working with Guy as his publicist in the mid-2000s. And in 2008, we started working on a biography, and like Diana, my mentor, her name is Alana Nash, and she's written many books about Elvis Presley and Colonel Tom Parker and Jessica Savage and others. She also said to me, you know, do not write an authorized book. So I said to Guy, I want you to open up your archives to me. I want you to spend hours and hours and hours talking to me. I want you to introduce me to all of your friends and family and tell them to talk to me, and then I'm going to go away and write the book, and you can't read it until it's published. And he leaned back in his chair and, sounds fair to me, Tamara. But I still didn't believe him because I had been a fan of Guy since I was 14 years old. And I knew his repertoire well, and you know, he didn't really talk a lot about himself. He would tell stories like LA Freeway and the Grapefruit Tree and the Landlord, and about Jack Craig, who Desperado was waiting for a train, but he really wasn't talking about himself and his feelings and how he viewed the world other than what you got out of his songs. So I said to him, well, I'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll do our first interview, and if I feel like I don't get anything from you, then we'll just cut our losses. And he laughed at me, as he did often. And I went back, and the first story Guy told me, you probably have seen this ring on his hand if you know anything about Guy. He wore this turquoise ring, and it was a very striking ring, and it's in every picture I've ever seen of him. And so I said, tell me the story of the ring. And he told me the story that he dated Bunny Talley, who's his wife Susanna's sister. He dated Bunny before Susanna. And Guy lived in San Francisco for a year in 1969. And he was coming back to Houston, and so Bunny flew out there, and they rented a car and drove as far as Amarillo. And Guy got on a bus to Houston, and Bunny got on a bus to Oklahoma City. And when Bunny got to Oklahoma City, she killed herself. And that was the first story Guy told me. So I'm sitting there by him going, okay, he's really going to do this. And so for the next 8 years, we were pretty much joined at the hip. I went through every inch of his house, and he's also a hoarder and a pack rat.
Go back to the ring.
The ring?
Yeah.
What
The
about
ring
it?
that he's always worn.
What about it?
Tell about it. Tell more about the ring.
Well, the ring, he and Bunny bought it in Arizona on their trip home. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of an important piece. So they
I
bought the
love
ring
her
together.
stories. Tell the story about the ring.
Yeah, they bought the ring together, and he never took it off, so that's how that ties in. But Guy died. I had turned in the book September of 2015, and my whole goal while I was writing it was for it to come out for his 75th birthday, and which would have been in November of 2016. So I turned it in September of 2015, and my wonderful editors at Texas A&M were, working diligently on it, and I was getting photos together and going over the page proofs, and we were trying to pull it together, and meanwhile Guy was dying, actively dying, and my mom was dying at the same time. So 2016 was a very weird year. 2 people close to me died, and my book came out. Guy died on May 17th, 2016, and Guy was telling everybody for the last few years of his life that he wanted Terry Allen, who we all know and love, to put Guy's remains in a sculpture. And so we, a bunch of Guy's friends in Nashville, decided that we needed to get Guy's remains to Terry. So we got a tour bus, and we drove from Nashville to Santa Fe, 18 hours, with Guy's remains on the bus. It was me and Steve Earle and Rodney Crowell and Sean Camp and Merlin Thompson and Guy's son Travis and Jim McGuire, who photographed Guy through his whole career. And we got to Santa Fe, up to Terry and Joe Harvey's house, and Joe and Sharon Ely had met us there, and Lyle Lovett and his wife April, and Robert Earl and Kathleen Keene, and Emmy Lou and Vince Gill flew in, and so it was a lot of people that, were very close to Guy, and we had a wake for him, and then the next day, I sat in Terry and Joe Harvey's yard, and I wrote the end of the book. Because we were ready to go to press, and Guy died, so the ending had to change. So I feel very emotional about this book because I love Guy so much. I was not an objective journalist at all. I did write about the darkness because there was a lot of darkness in Guy's life. And Susanna died in 2012. And after Susanna died, Guy handed me 2 boxes of Susanna's journals. And I said, have you read these? And he said, no, but whatever's in them is Susanna's truth, and you're welcome to it. And Susanna's journals, first of all, made me fall in love with Susanna, but it was her stories about Guy and Townes Van Zandt, who she was very close to. They were quite a threesome. So the documentary really is the story of the friendship between Guy, Susanna, and Townes, and how it influenced them as artists. which is in the book, but that's what we're focusing on in the film. And I want to say about these women up here, first of all, I'm the only non-Texan. I grew up in Wisconsin, but I got here as quickly as I can. But Guy introduced me to Kathleen, and he said, Kathleen is a badass. And Guy loved strong women. And I think I met Kimmy well through Sharon and Joe probably, and I met Sharon and Joe through Guy, and Terry and Joe Harvey. Diana, I met you through, I guess, the Pickers and Poets book, and Jenny and
Jenny and Brian.
Yeah.
One of my other daughters.
yeah, and I love that, and Amy I just met, but I love her work. I love Mother Light. So I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And I'm probably a rare person that has been telling everybody for years that I couldn't wait to go to Lubbock. And people always look at me strangely when I say that. So I'm so happy to finally be here in Lubbock. Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you. Thank you. Like I said, these are fascinating women, fascinating stories. So I would come down there and if anybody have any questions, raise your hand, I'll be right down.
I love it.
You're sort of like Stephen Colbert.
This is Kimmy, and I was very lucky to get to work with Joe back about 1986. I was working for the Maines Brothers, and we played. It was the Stubbs Barbecue Jam at the Austin, what was it called? Where the studio is now, but opposite the Opera House.
Oh, yeah, the
Austin Opera House. But then the next day, and I was talking to this gentleman here about, that's when Butch Hancock had his Dixie bus stop and
Dixie's Bar.
bus stop, and Joe was the engineer for that. And the Maines Brothers played there, and I actually got to work with Joe, but I wanted to make this story, but I think I've never seen anyone who didn't use their voice, how they communicated. What was the little, it's not an Etch-a-Sketch, what was the little deal he had that he would write?
It was called a magic slate. There's a picture
Yeah, a
of one in the
magic
book,
slate.
and the beauty of his magic slate was not only did he write on it, but you could make notes on the back of it. But you know, most people in his life never really learned to speak sign language, and he actually really never learned to speak sign language either. And he wasn't a candidate for any of those other contraptions until later on, and even then he didn't like it because he had a beautiful voice. So he actually talks about that in the book, because later when we were back at MD Anderson, they actually tried to give him speech with a thing called the tracheal esophageal prosthesis, which was incredible. And because you could push the button and reroute it and all this stuff. So, but his speech pathologist there, he didn't like the sound of it. He only used it, as I said, to curse me and scare small children. but there's a really poignant letter that I'm so glad we have, that his speech pathologist asked him if he would write a letter to a fellow patient there who's about to lose his voice forever. And so it really caused Gracie to have to sit and think, after 30 years of not talking, what am I going to say to this guy? And he just said brilliant things, but it's the one, real moment where we get to hear everything Joe Gracie thought about not speaking for 30 years, and it is amazing. But he also had all this wit, it's poignant. With him, there's always this balance of poignant and funny, because he always tempered everything. Yeah, and he would get mad, he would throw it at you like this, and when he would get drunk, it would be like this. But he always tempered his writing. It was the dark light thing. He always saw the humor in everything. His hero was W.C. Fields. And he thought of himself as sort of a Mark Twain kind of a witty character too when he would write. So one of the things that he says in that letter, there are many things in the letter, not enough time, but one of the things that I loved about it was he said that everyone will think that you're
when you don't talk, everyone will think that you are wiser than you are, which I am not. But this brilliant man who was so eloquent, spent 30 years you could only write about 8 words,
Yeah.
and then you had to lift the
And then
film.
you had to
the
lift it
rest
up
of
and
it.
put it
Yeah,
on
but
the
thank
ground.
you, yeah, thank you for
Well,
asking
that's
about
my
that.
memory of him. I just,
Yeah.
what I love about that is, that was something that we could relate, that's how he could communicate to us. We didn't have to learn something from him. He made sure that we knew what he was trying to
Well,
do.
and I think it made him kind of fun and different, when I met him, I immediately, it was a while before we fell in love and were together, but I just couldn't wait to see the words emerge on the page, and he would
cock himself.
Well, and that was gonna be my question, did you donate one to the archives, one of his?
Did I do
I have one.
Yeah, I think I did that early on. There were only, at one point, we found that there were only, we would go buy them 10 at a time at dime stores, and we were at Cowboy Clement's house one time, and his magic slate was getting worn out, and they melted and stuff, and I said, I haven't been able to find any lately, and he said, me either. And I went, I wonder if they discontinued them, so I got the number. We're in Nashville, I got the number off of it. I called the company, I'm here in Cowboy's Kitchen, called them the place, and they said, oh, we've discontinued those. And it's like, so I said, well, do you have any left? And they said, well, we can go out and check the warehouse. And I said, well, will you do that immediately? And they came back and said, we have something like 347 left. And I said, well, will you ship those to us immediately? I'll buy all of them. So they shipped everything they had left. And then it was a mad dash to get back to our house in Austin from Nashville because it was hot weather and they melt. And they were going to leave them on the front porch. And we didn't get back there before they did. So we always joked that he would be like that Dustin Hoffman character that when his shoes wore out, he'd have to die because he didn't like to wear any other kind of shoes. And we always said he was going to have to die when he lost his life. But there were about 30 of them left. And that's one of the things I'm doing. When I did my Kickstarter, we had one of the incentives was we must believe in magic slate. We did. So
Yeah, we were able to get them. Thank you for that.
it made him special.
You had questions? Oh, over here. Did I see a hand?
She was just, it was like, luckily it's
You
not
were just
watching.
judging? Okay.
Sold.
Sold to the woman.
$1 million.
Thanks,
Fill
yeah.
it out. Kimmy, are both of your kids in music?
I have 3 children. My eldest son, that was actually born in Lubbock, when I was 17, I had a 2-week-old baby that was born here in Lubbock. His name's Jeremy. And he is a really good songwriter. I actually put one of his CDs in the archive, but he recorded an album, and then I took him on the road with me, and it was the thing that Cowboy Clement had said. He said, there was somebody in the music business I didn't like. And I said, who is that? And he said, the audience. So Jeremy didn't enjoy the audience very much, so he didn't make any more records anymore. My son Gabriel Rhodes has been playing the guitar since he was 12. He grew up with Willie Nelson. You hear that in his playing a lot because Willie was around a lot when another great mentor of mine, and then my daughter Jolie Goodnight Gracie has become a really great jazz singer. She's now, my first band was Kimmy Rose and the Jackalope Brothers, and now she has a band called Jolie and the Jackalopes. It's a tribute band to Jolie and the Kimmy Rose and the Jackalope Brothers, and she's also a burlesque performer. There's been a really big comeback of burlesque from my parents' generation. It was a big thing, the Sally Band and all that. So, and it's actually a pretty incredible women's movement. I'm very proud of her about that. So yes, all 3 of my children in one way or another have been involved in music. Thanks for giving me a chance to brag about my children.
Well, I know some people don't like to talk on the microphone, and you're probably going to maybe go out and talk to these wonderful women just individually. How about if you close us out with the song Radio Dreams tonight, Kimmy, that she wrote specifically for the book?
Well, I had everything else in the world. I had museum exhibits and archives and documentaries and books and And I thought, wait a minute, I'm a songwriter. The only thing left to do is I haven't written a song called Radio Dreams. And so my friend Gary Nicholson that Diana mentioned, the most used phrase on the Delbert McClinton Blues Cruise is, "This is a song I wrote with Gary Nicholson."
That's true.
And so he was at the house, and I said, "Help me out with this because I don't want to do this by myself, you know." So, and he had read the book and had tears going down his cheeks, and I thought, okay, he gets it. So we wrote this song called Radio Dreams. With my little transistor hid under my pillow, I drifted away where rock and roll and Memphis soul showed a whole new world to me. I wake up with this song rolling down in my head, in a groove I'd never forget. I felt a change coming over me to my radio dreams. Radio dreams, radio dreams. I've been tuning in all of my life to my radio dreams. Radio dreams, radio dreams. I've been tuning in all of my life to my radio dreams. I bought a guitar, played Beatles and Stones, and soon I was making up songs in my phone. I started to be who I wanted to be, dreaming my radio dreams. Radio dreams, radio dreams. I've been tuning in all of my life to my radio dreams.
We're making plans to bring Kenny back in June for a special house concert, so stay tuned. So,
Well, here's what you can do about that. That song that I just wrote, which is not released on a record, a rare vintage track of Joe Gracie singing a Cowboy Clemens song. I guess things happen that way. A little teaser of the audio documentary by a great DJ named Bob Harris. Google that. And then the ending of Joe Gracie's radio show, which is kind of a good way to end this, where he'd always say, "Stay off your feet, drink lots of water, and come when you can." And then my song, West Texas Heaven. So if you go to KimmyRose.com, I hate the little pop-up box, I gotta get it off of there, just hit the X and get rid of that. But there's a little widget with the book cover there. If you put your email in there, you can get this song and a download for free of the EP that we did to promote the book. I'm about to embark on the book tour of England pretty soon in London. So you can go there and get that for free. We'll have your email when we do the house concert here. We'll send out an email and you'll know.
that's great. Once again, I want to thank Kathleen Hudson, Adrian Kenny Rhodes, Diana Taylor Hendricks, and Cameron Salviano. We'll be all out of here. Please come